glad to be here with this excellent group. Yeah, we've assembled a panel of entrepreneurs, scientists, investors to talk about the prospects for incorporation of the products of cellular agriculture as it relates to animal cell culture into plant-based foods. So I guess we have a few kind of different subsections here, but and I'll be kind of pointing questions at specific people, but I think we ought to just start with the simplest question of the day, which is around Robin. Everyone can introduce themselves, their background, and what their company is and what it does. And maybe we'll start with Olivia, and then David Welch, and then David Brandeis.
All right, thank you. I'm super happy to be here and be able to share some of my knowledge and hear from you.
Olivia, can you?
So you can't hear me?
No, we can hear you. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
It's just Nate who froze, I think.
Yeah, that's what I see. Oops. Okay, so anyway.
Am I still frozen? Let's just do intro. Go ahead with intros then.
Okay, sure. So I'm a food engineer. I spent the first 8 years of my career in the more traditional side of the food industry. And back in 2015, I was working for a food company who was not doing so well. And actually, I was in charge of shutting down a factory. And in that company, given this environment, there was no more risk-taking, no more innovation. So with my husband, we decided to leave our jobs and move to the Silicon Valley to really discover how innovation was made. So that's how back in 2015, I was hired by this small company of scientists who had a crazy idea of an impossible burger. So at that time they were at lab scale, and they hired me to build and launch their first burger facility in Oakland in front of San Francisco. I absolutely loved the experience, the approach, the energy. And so once this was done, Pat Brown, the CEO, asked me to build a team of project managers who could support the rapid growth of Impossible. So that was a great experience. But a few months ago, my husband and I decided to move back to our home country, France. And so I started looking for a job. I was interviewing, and being a food person, I was always asking to taste the product. When I tasted Vital Meat, so Vital Meat is a cultivated meat company. When I tasted their product, I was blown away, and I knew I had a winner there because of the product, but also because they could show me metrics to prove that they could scale technically and economically. So we both thought it was a great match. And so here I am, part of Vital Meat, supporting the company to get to the next stage and launch their first facility.
I think I was next on your list, Nate. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to the organizers for the invite. I'm David Welch. I'm the CSO and co-founder of Synthesis Capital, which is a new investment vehicle created to transform our food system through food technology. I'm a scientist by training. I did my PhD in plant molecular biology in the Netherlands. And then I left, or I guess maybe escaped academia, and spent most of my career in the life science industry in the areas of cell therapy and bioprocessing, which at the time was all focused on therapeutics. But as everyone on this panel and I'm sure most of the audience know, a lot of that technology is now being used in the food space. And that all took me to join the Good Food Institute. I was their first director of science and technology. Very lucky to join when the industry was really just starting to take off, and kind of all of that led to I guess, another turn in my career of moving into the investment space with synthesis.
Excellent. Next, David. Yeah, Olivia is winning the award for the most inspiring background story. I really enjoyed that. Mine is a bit more, I think, simple. I spent a lot of time in the food ecosystem for the last 10 years. By background, I'm an engineer, but also a scientist. I have spent most of my time on the commercial side of things. First at a consumer goods company, then in consulting, moving forward towards food retail and production here in Switzerland, where I live. And then in 2019, together with my co-founder, Dirk Standard, decided to create Piece of Meat, a company, as alluded to earlier, that is active in the production of cultured fat as an ingredient. We really saw a market need here, which I think is now confirmed also by various GFI positions, who is positioning cultured fat as an ingredient front and foremost in some of their cultured meat related documents. We have, as part of a funding round, accepted a acquisition offer by the Israeli company Meatech, and are listed on, as mentioned before, also Nasdaq stock market since March this year, and are really joining forces in order to cover the whole spectrum of cultured meat, from hybrids to three-dimensionals.
Awesome, thanks, and hopefully my connectivity is good. It says it's very fast. Thanks, everyone. One more round robin question, and then we'll dive into more pointed questions. And I hope this isn't repetitive, but I think there could be interesting answers here. So, cultivated meat's a bit of a hybrid itself. It's a confluence of science from tissue engineering and equipment from biologics and biofuels, and even consumer insights from the plant-based success there. So I'm curious, how your own kind of personal confluences of experience, the cultivated meat industry didn't exist 10 years ago, so none of us came from that. So how does kind of your confluence of experiences changed how you think about the idea of cultivated meat, or how we approach it, what its place in the world is? And let's keep the same order here.
Okay, I can start on that. So on my side, I didn't naturally fall into the cultivated meat world. First, because I come from a very traditional French family. We're all meat eaters. And so the first time I came close to the plant-based sector was through my first experience. I was working for Sensient, which is a leading flavor house, an American company. And when I was there, I was hearing our plant-based meat clients, explaining their struggle with creating juiciness and meatiness in their products. And so we were coming up with solutions with flavors that are essentially yeast extract and small molecules that we call top notes. And so that's how I realized that actually in those products, in the plant-based products, none of the taste was coming from the plants. So that was my first realization. And then I ended up working for Impossible. And the first time I tasted their burger, I was blown away by the taste. It was the first time I was eating a plant-based burger that was actually tasty. So during my 5 years in the Bay Area, I always had Impossible meat in my fridge, and I actually reduced my meat consumption. But now, I've been in France since a few months now, I don't have access anymore to Impossible meat. So I naturally went into the supermarket. And when I was exploring buying plant meat alternatives, none of them were tasting really good. So basically, when then I went to Vital Meat and I tasted their chicken. They have a chicken, cell-based chicken. I immediately saw, the opportunity to close the gap, the gap in taste that plant-based products have. So that's how basically, sorry for my long blurb, but that's how I landed in the cultivated meat world.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, Nate. I think kind of reflecting on it, my whole career is kind of a confluence of events. I mentioned in my intro that I started in plant biology. I did my PhD in that, and when I left there, I never really imagined a path back to working with plants. And then the rest of my career was very much focused on cell therapy and bioprocessing. And so launching things weirdly, like I guess one of the things that I did, which kind of circled back to me later, was I launched a cell culture media while at Thermo Fisher called Essential 8. And at the time I had no idea that it would become this sort of focal point of like cost calculations and things like that for the cultivated meat industry until I joined GFI, and Liz Specht, who I'm sure everyone is familiar with, told me, yeah, I'm working on this analysis of cell culture media for the cultivated meat industry, and I'm using this media called Essential 8. And I was like, oh, hey, I know that product pretty well. So, and I guess at the time when I joined, I had this background in cell therapy, right? And there, the sort of the focus is very much 100% cells to replace something inside a human body or deliver some kind of therapy. So in my mind, I assumed that this was going to be the primary application of animal cells for meat as well. That it was all about 100% animal cells, and I hadn't really considered hybrid technologies at that point. But then once we started to understand like some of the cost barriers and taste goals, David alluded to a lot of this in his presentation just before, that then the sort of my plant background started to merge with this more recent experience with animal cells. So I very much feel like a hybrid person that's part of a hybrid industry.
Cool. Yeah, so for me, as mentioned before, my background is both a bit business and in business and in the sciences, and I think my hearts have always been oscillating a little bit around or between those two concepts. I'm always very interested in generating both business opportunities, but with an innovation angle, and at the same time, also as Geza introduced, I think earlier, I follow this strong conviction of doing well by doing good. So any business opportunity needs to have a positive impact for the planet. So a planetary impact, which could be people's health, could be animals, could be resources or resource exploitation in general. And I've never really found my angle to it. I missed the electric vehicle revolution, and then I missed the solar revolution, and I never really found my way into it, and couldn't motivate myself to get active in the space until I also reduced and finally completely stopped consuming animal products and just developed a very strong affection to the food system, and then naturally combining that with thinking about the next innovations. This is where I think me and my co-founder ended up.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks everyone for sharing that about yourselves and the work you do. So let's take one question each at just a high level approach so we can get orienteering information on, what is a hybrid product? What does it mean to be using products of animal cell culture and plant-based food? So the first one to David Welch, just what is the value proposition to plant-based companies or plant-based products of incorporating products of animal cell culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think taste, or actually the entire sensory experience, aroma and texture, the way it looks is key to adoption. I think once cultivated meat companies can demonstrate a significant improvement in those sensory attributes compared to existing plant-based formulations, they're going to have a really compelling value proposition. I think maybe somewhat secondary, but also important, is nutrition. If it's relevant to a certain product, that you can bring in cultivated ingredients that are going to then allow that end product to match more closely the nutritional profile of the product that the company is trying to replace. And I think maybe this is obvious to everyone, but I think it's worth repeating that I think most of the consumers that we're talking about here are consumers that want to experience the taste or texture of animal meat, egg, and dairy products, but without the environmental, food security, animal welfare issues that come along with, farming animals intensively. And I think adding another tool to their ingredient toolbox is going to allow plant-based companies to edge closer and closer to true biomimicry of animal meat, egg, and dairy products. I guess the last thing I'll say is that I think initially there will be a higher cost for these cultivated ingredients. So I think this sensory improvement will be key to demonstrate. I also think it's likely that cultivated ingredients can provide more than one sort of essential property to these foods. So they might not just provide a taste improvement, but it may remove the need for an extra additive like a binder or something like that in a plant-based meat. So perhaps also, while edging closer to biomimicry, you're also improving the clean label attributes of some of these products.
Thank you. Quick follow-up, I guess, on that. Like beyond flavors and label, do you see, are there benefits on like the more food science front? So melt points or protein structure or Maillard reaction, do you think that there are performance benefits as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're already seeing that with some of the prototypes, and I think probably Olivia is even better placed than me to answer some of those questions. So I'm gonna hand that off to her.
Yeah, I agree. So it's the sensory part, the nutritional part, the ingredients list, but also some functionalities such as the Maillard reaction is very important. So it's going to be the taste, it's going to be the smell, it's going to be the bite. When you eat a piece of meat, it's like lots of things happen. It's not just your taste buds that are working. And so I think it's bringing a plus on all those aspects.
Yeah, maybe just to follow on from that, I think that the interesting part, right, is like how much cultivated or how many cultivated cells do you need in these products to sort of dial in those specific attributes. And I think that's one of the most exciting areas of research in these hybrid products now, is like figuring out what combinations of plant proteins and fats and other ingredients and cultivated fat, cultivated muscle cells, blood cells that you need for a specific application. And I don't think it's the same from beef to pork to chicken to fish. So I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting research coming out in that area.
Yeah, new toolbox or sandbox for food science.
Right
there. Yeah, cool. So Olivia, obviously the idea behind plant-based, the new wave of plant-based is appealing to the mainstream consumer who's just trying to reduce meat consumption. But obviously vegetarians and vegans are an important kind of subgroup of consumers. And, these cultivated hybrid products might not technically be vegan or vegetarian. So I'm curious if you have an opinion on, whether plant-based companies would be generally open to using these kinds of ingredients and under what circumstances.
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're right. Cultivated meat isn't probably appealing to vegan and vegetarian people. And actually, at Vital Meat, we are targeting meat eaters, and that's the case of most plant-based meat companies. We are targeting people who love meat, but would like to reduce their meat consumption without any compromise of taste, basically. And that's a really hard task. And so the closer we get to the real taste of meat, the better. So that's, I guess, for the first part of your question. The second part, will plant-based company be open to working with cultivated meat companies? At Vital Meat, 2 years ago, we started partnerships with major food players, whether ingredient industries or finished product industries. And so we know for a fact that they are open, they are willing, they're interested not only to learn about what we do, but to actually play with our ingredients. So interest, yes, a lot, but again, within the R&D teams that we're working with, there will always be people who are super open, super willing, to work with us, and others who are more like, what is this? I don't want to work with cells. What is that? So there is, when I talk about the partnership, there is a big part of education. And the great thing with cultivated meat, and I'm sure it's the same for you, David Brandes, with the fats, is that, okay, you can explain things theoretically, but people have to taste your product. Once they taste it, it's so amazing that they automatically kind of switch in their mind, and they're more willing to work with you. So yeah, I think there is a great path moving forward of partnerships between those two types of companies.
Yeah, thank you. And for David Brandes here, so speaking of kind of this toolbox of ingredients that companies might have access to, could you talk a little bit about what those specific tools might be, or those ingredients? So, adipocytes, myocytes, collagens, like those kinds of things. And maybe what do you think is the most going to be in demand, or, most valuable? And I think I might have a feeling what you'll say.
Yeah, let's keep that answer really short, and then I'll be able to maybe also add to both David's and Olivia's position on the earlier question. So it's fat. It's fat for all the right reasons that we mentioned before. I think gelatin is a very interesting market. I understand pretty difficult to make, but not deep enough in that topic. I also think that supplements, omega-3s, 6s, maybe even B12. Haven't seen any B12 coming out of animal cell culturing. I mean, I understand that there are also other ways to produce B12, but I think the supplement space in itself might be interesting. Now, on the first question to David, what are the, I think, critical elements to make, let's say, success factors? I think from a financial perspective or financial viability perspective, we believe it's completely key to also work with a cell line that is both continuous and grows in single cell suspension. Otherwise, we don't believe that that a scaled production process at cost is possible, and ideally also non-GMO, which we might come to later. And then also what Olivia mentioned, I would just like to second that. So as soon as you have the product in hand and offer tastings, such as Olivia was offered from Vital Meat when discussing this job opportunity, you're really able to change people's perspective. And I think that's also the big difference versus a conference of this sort last year and a conference of this sort this year. We at Piece of Meat are planning at least 5 events and have conducted and are still conducting this year, where we're bringing real cultured product onto the table in closed environments. And we're both, consumers, investors, partners, visitors can smell and taste product, and it's such a game changer versus where we would have been a year ago. Completely agree there.
Cool, thank you. Any other comments on that before we move on to the next section? Okay, so yeah, one question for each on the consumer regulatory operational side of things, and we'll start with David Welch. And sorry, this might be a bit unfair to ask, but obviously public perception and consumer trust is going to be super important for this field to succeed. I mean, as with any kind of novel food as well. And so when companies are thinking about incorporating cell-based ingredients into their products, how should they be communicating with consumers, or like talking about what it is that they're doing or the products that they're creating are?
Yeah, I mean, I think transparency is really important, or the ability to be transparent about what ingredients are being included in the product and how those are being made. I think consumers are looking for that, not just in food products, but just across the board. And I think it's also a key differentiator compared to, conventional animal meat, right, where that industry is purposely not transparent. I think alongside that, there needs to be more collaboration across stakeholders, from whether it's companies or universities that are working in cultivated meat or hybrid products, and nonprofits, even government agencies that are involved. I think we need better consensus and alignment on how these products will be described, how the technology will be described, and clearer science-based education around what these products are and what they're not, right? Both the advantages and disadvantages of them. I think there just needs to be better education in terms of food technology. I think we can kind of look back to the introduction of GMO crops and foods, which I was kind of loosely connected to, and see that the problems with that, right? There was very much a lack of clear information provided. The science, the way it was presented, was very confusing, and that caused confusion with consumers and caused problems with adoption, and continues to cause problems with adoption in both from consumers but also government agencies, right? They have some have quite backward stances towards GMO in general, and then when better technologies come along like CRISPR, they're still very much against those, because there's just a lack of understanding of what can be done with those. And I think the same risks are present for cultivated meat and hybrid products. But I think if the community can come together and strategize on how to best educate consumers, I think the path will be far less bumpy than the one that GMOs went down.
Yeah, thanks. And here's one example of the community being together. So maybe in the networking session, people can come up with ideas. Also, the government. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to share one thing, and it's just that Tony Hunter, who started this conference, said that it's really hard to predict the future, and that no one will be able to really tell what's going to happen. But I think that I agree with David. If you look at the past and you try to find comparisons, you can, kind of create your own answers. And so in that sense, I just wanted to share that when I joined the Impossible in 2015, we had this big fear that the heme, so the heme is the protein that is produced through fermentation that is then added to the final product. It's hemoglobin. It's like your blood. Like it smells like blood. It has the color of blood. It oxidizes like blood. And we all thought that people would be put off by that. They would be scared because we're saying it's plant-based, but it has blood. And so we were really over-communicating on it because of this fear. And, after making a few progress with, key chefs that were endorsing us, because at that time there was we didn't have the GRAS approval for the heme. So after, we started creating the brand and trust around the brand, the heme was not a topic anymore. And actually, if you go on the Impossible website now, it's like maybe this page number 6 that you will, where you will discover that heme is actually a thing. So, I just wanted to share this because I know it's not exactly the same, but it's an experience where, we had this fear, we were over communicating, and in the end, the trust that was created and the taste, obviously, did the trick. So,
yeah.
I think I completely agree, and I think taste is so paramount, right? So if you solve the taste problem or the sensory problem with some of these plant-based products by adding in these ingredients, ultimately consumers are going to buy the thing that tastes great. And I think how the ingredients are made becomes somewhat secondary.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess one thing I'll just add is that I think one of the main ways that companies talk to consumers is through labels, and the governments will certainly have a say in, or I guess the final say in how things are labeled. And in the US, the USDA currently has a request for comments out right now on labeling laws. So if you're an interested party, you can Google that and put in your 2 cents. Okay, on the operational side of things for Olivia here. So if you're a plant-based company that's looking to integrate some cell-based products to improve functionality or taste or whatever, are there any kind of key challenges in the integration? And I guess maybe a second question is, we'd mentioned inclusion levels earlier. What kind of inclusion level do you expect to see in maybe the first wave of these kind of products? Like, how much cell-based material is needed to be added?
Yeah. Okay, so first, in terms of the challenges, that if a plant-based company wants to integrate cultivated products, what are they going to face? So I'm not going to talk about the consumer acceptance, but so let's focus maybe on the technical side. On this side, I'm not worried. Like, we have tasted on ours. I'm going to talk for what I know, of course. So with our chicken products, so we are partnering with key industry food players, and we haven't seen any technical red flag so far. And we have tried many applications from nuggets to sausages to sauces to whole pieces. So no red flag. That said, it's a new ingredient. Okay, so the R&D teams from the plant-based companies are gonna have to go through this learning curve of how to use it. And the natural thing that's gonna happen is that they're gonna reproduce the way they use an equivalent product. So if you're giving them a cell-based chicken, they're going to think, okay, I'm going to cook it as I cook my chicken. And so there are adaptations there, because our cell-based product has slightly different cooking times and temperatures, and maybe the order of addition is going to be different. So that's why I'm talking about the learning curve, and we're going to have to go through a path of trial and error, and until we reach to the right recipe, to the right formulation. I think it's totally feasible for a plant-based company to integrate a cultivated product, but as any new product, there is a learning curve. Then for the second part of your question, rate of inclusion. So of course, that's a huge topic, because it's going to determine the price of your finished product. And so depending on the price of the ingredient, the plant-based company are going to say, yeah, I can add it to my formulation or not. However great your product is, if they are making no margin on it, they won't want it. So it's a big topic, and I think David Brandes, you mentioned that in your presentation. We have to be careful when we talk about rate of inclusion. It can mean so many different things. First, your product might not be pure cells. So if your product is not pure cells, well, that's easy. It's easier to add within a full formulation. Then it depends on what type of cultivated product you're talking about. You won't want to add the same amount of a cultivated fat compared to a cultivated muscle meat or just chicken cells, for instance. And it also depends of the concentration. So, if your product has 4 to 5% of protein, you will need to add more compared to, if your product has 12% of protein. So it's just to say that when we talk about inclusion rate, we have to be very specific about what we're talking about. And of course, it depends also on the applications. For instance, on our side, to be very concrete, we tried various things. We tried adding our cells within the core formulation to produce nuggets. Well, in that case, if you really want to bring a plus to the product, you need at least a 2-digit percentage. I would say maybe 10 to 45%, like somewhere around that, if you have the same protein level as real chicken, of course. But we also tried coating, for instance, like just you don't need a lot, but actually when you're going to grill the piece of meat you have, it's going to get the smell, the Maillard reaction, the crust, and so you will need to add less, but it's going to add something to your product. So yeah, sorry, I can't answer, like have a very specific answer, but yeah, so just be careful when you talk about inclusion rate.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great answer. And yeah, David Brandes, I have last one on this section for you, and it's probably also unfairly hard. How do the regulatory considerations change, or the difficulty of regulatory approvals or those hurdles change when you go from the idea of cultivated meat as a standalone product comprising whole cells of multiple types to maybe as just an ingredient, if at all?
So okay, so first on the inclusion rate again before, because I mean that's kind of, I don't know if vital meat is also, you're not producing cultured biomass as an ingredient, right? It's probably not. Also B2B. Okay, so for us, focusing on fat exclusively in the chicken domain, we're looking at if it's a nugget of around, and it's exactly also what Olivia said, so 15 to 20%. If you go towards a sausage, it's typically a product that has a bit more fat content, so there you can go a bit higher, 25%. That's the inclusion rate. And I would also just really like to urge and ask every cultured meat company that is putting out a prototype to just say in the fine print what the inclusion rate is, because otherwise we're just not doing a service to the industry, and it should really become the standard. And that is true for also products that are already regulated in Singapore. So if we can make that a standard, I think it would be just great for the industry and would add so much more credibility. Now, in terms of regulatory pathway and the comparison between an ingredient or cultured fat and cultured meat, I mean it's similarly regulated. There is no difference because we would need to regulate the ingredient standalone, plus on top also the hybrid product, but that's not under novel food, right? So you first regulate the ingredient under the novel food regulations, and then as this ingredient is already regulated, the hybrid product will have a very, let's say, easy way to market. Now, as you mentioned, if there are less cells involved, for example, only one specific cell line that we culture and differentiate and then harvest, I would actually believe that the regulatory process is probably a bit more let's say singular or simpler than if you have a range of both so cells that are differentiated into various target cell forms, because you also need different types of media when you want to differentiate a cell into, for example, either an adipocyte, an hepatocyte, a muscle cell, a tissue cell. So if you have all those in one final product that is composed of 100% cultured, then you'll probably have a much heavier dossier in front of the regulator. But the overall requirement would be the same in front of the regulator. So you would have to go to novel foods. You would have to go to through GM approval or not, depending on the. Even in the US, we always say that no problem for GM in the US. Yeah, but that's only true for plants. I've not yet seen that many actual animal cell-based products based on a genetically modified platform that are actually green-lighted for consumption. So that's why I also believe GM-free is the way, both for ingredients, obviously, and 100% cultured products. So yeah, that would be my perspective.
Yeah, thank you. And we're low on time. We'll move to our last section here, kind of on trends and predictions for the future. And I'll stay with you, David. So from my perspective, cell-based fat seems to be one of the hottest, most trending areas in the cultivated meat sector. I'm curious what your predictions for how that sector will look in the future.
Yeah, I mean, we totally believe that that it will be. I mean, I think it's kind of a common belief that the future of meat in general will be multifold. So we'll have all sorts of meats being consumed in the future, plant-based, microbial fermentation-based, cultured, and also hopefully only high quality and ethically sourced livestock meat. And I believe that cultured fat can be an ingredient for all four of them. And therefore, I think, like, probably from an investor perspective, it's more of the hooks and shovels that hopefully will be included as an ingredient, and therefore, I believe that it's not just a transitional technology, but really something that also in the long run will be a very useful ingredient.
So we've got the flavor houses, and we'll have the fat houses. Maybe is one ingredient provider.
That I didn't understand.
There are big flavor companies like Givaudan.
Yeah,
maybe we'll have a fat and oil version of that.
Yeah, and then there can also be even a collaboration between the cultured fat and the flavor houses, because there can always be, probably a certain tweak in the already existing flavor. Yeah. Okay. So even there, it's probably not only competition.
Okay.
I guess every cultured meat company is working with a flavor house also.
Yeah, they're super active in the space. So I guess somewhat related to flavor houses, for David Welch, and maybe this is a tiny bit of a detour, but I'm curious what your thoughts on the applicability of what we've been talking about today to precision fermentation, the use of ingredients like that. Impossible Foods pioneered the use of heme. It's kind of blockbuster fermentation ingredient to provide functionality. I don't think we've seen a ton of that other than what traditionally is done in flavors. What do you think the future of precision fermentation ingredients is, I guess?
Yeah, I think it's huge. One, because it's a very flexible platform, right? If you know the genetic sequence of the protein you're trying to create, you can, the molecular biology behind getting that into a yeast or a bacteria and getting it expressed and purifying it is pretty straightforward. Doing it at high titers so you can get the cost down is another more challenging aspect of it. But I think we're going to see a lot of growth there. I think that the industry there's already an industry doing that, right? Whether it's in pharmaceuticals or in the food space. So scale up is a known entity. There's some challenges around capacity that exist, but I think we're starting to see more of these types of ingredients come out, like in the cheese space, right? There's a whole bunch of startups working on recombinant caseins and whey proteins that will be a part of hybrid cheese and other dairy products. I think there's just a lot of interesting proteins to uncover in the meat space, right? Beyond the hemoglobin family and other types of proteins that can add different sensory attributes. So I personally think that we're going to see a huge amount of growth in precision fermentation, and I guess molecular farming in parallel, right? Using plants to produce these proteins, which potentially has some really interesting cost and scale benefits.
And do you believe infrastructure can be shared between various technologies, David?
I hope so. I think we're starting to see some of the larger players that have either excess capacity or the ability to create like fermentation capacity easily move into this space to provide, I guess, shared infrastructure, right? That you would obviously pay for, but it's not, I think everyone is aware of the lack of capacity. And I think now we're starting to see either new companies come into the space to provide capacity, or big incumbents see the
I was thinking about capacity between the cultured and the precision fermentation.
Yeah,
sorry, I wasn't clear.
Yeah. I don't see why not. I mean, there's some differences between the bioreactor technology, depending on what you're producing on the cultivated side. But I think that's quite an interesting question, right? I see, and maybe just building on from that, I think ultimately we're going to see products that contain fermentation-derived ingredients, cultivated ingredients, and plant-based ingredients, and probably M&A activity integration across those technology verticals. So I imagine that there'll be in the future companies that have the ability to produce all of those ingredients in one facility.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think it's going to be key for scalability to show the right economic metrics. So, for instance, cultivated meat, it's a whole world. Where really, I think you would agree on that with me, David Brandes, because if you talk about fat or a complex finished product of various cells, it's very different. But at least the basis, what happens in the bioreactor, I think if you are able to produce in suspension, then it can be, you can leverage the equipment that exists in the fermentation space. And it's going to be very important. Then for the DSP part or the other parts after what happens in the bioreactor, I think it might be more difficult there.
Yeah.
Thanks. I think we might be at time. I mean, I could keep asking questions, but I don't want to cut too far into the networking opportunity. So, I guess Gaze, let me know if we should keep going. Maybe Olivia, just you could send us out with your predictions for the future of hybrid products.
Okay, that's a hard one. I think there is a bright future for sure. I think I would love to see the whole casts, reach scalability, reach the right economics. But I know it's not just for now. So I kind of agree with Tony Hunter, who's saying that maybe hybrid products are a bridge between now and the future. But I think right now, if we can trust in one thing, is that hybrid products are coming. They are going to be scalable. They are going to be in our supermarkets. We are going to get regulatory approval for that. So I'm very optimistic.
Excellent. Yeah, I think we all are.